Emily Carter grew up in a worn apartment building on the outskirts of Dayton, Ohio. One of those quiet complexes where the paint peeled a little more each year and the stairwells always smelled faintly of dust and old carpet. Their unit was on the fourth floor, 2 small bedrooms, a narrow kitchen, windows that looked out over a cracked playground where swings creaked even when no one was using them. Her mother died when Emily was 6. What remained of her were not stories or photographs, but sensations that surfaced without warning. The smell of baking drifting from the oven on Sunday afternoons. The warmth of hands guiding hers as her hair was braided before school. The steady rhythm of a voice humming softly at bedtime. Those fragments lingered, fragile and incomplete, like memories that knew they were not meant to last. The year after her mother's death passed as if wrapped in fog. Emily and her father moved through their days quietly, rarely speaking more than necessary. He left early for work and came home late, exhausted, his grief sealed behind long silences. Some evenings he sat at the small kitchen table staring at nothing in particular, coffee growing cold beside him. Emily would climb onto his lap without a word, rest her head against his chest, and listen to his breathing until it slowed. Neither of them knew how to comfort the other. Mornings were harder. Emily learned to get herself ready for school before she was ready to be alone. She tried to braid her own hair, fingers clumsy and uneven. Elastic bands slipped loose. At school, a teacher would quietly straighten her collar or smooth a stray lock, saying nothing, as if careful not to draw attention to what was missing. Lunchboxes were often light. Sometimes there was nothing at all. Her father forgot the grocery store more often than he remembered it. Emily struggled at school at first, not because she could not understand the lessons, but because she was tired of quiet rooms, tired of waiting. She learned quickly that asking questions did not bring answers, and that needing too much only made things heavier for everyone. So she stopped asking. At home, she adapted. She learned where things were kept, how to heat leftovers, how to stay out of the way. She became observant, careful, and small in her own presence. No one told her to do this. It simply felt necessary. Even then, something took root inside her, a quiet resolve, a longing for a life that felt steady, warm, and certain. Emily did not yet know what stability looked like, only that she wanted it more than anything, and that longing, born in absence, would follow her into every choice she made after. Linda Carter entered Emily's life when she was 8, arriving not with hesitation, but with movement and certainty. She worked with Emily's father and seemed to know exactly what needed to be done the moment she stepped through their door. The first time she visited, she brought bags of groceries and set them down on the counter without asking. She opened cabinets, frowned at expired cans, wiped dusty shelves, and spoke as she worked. By evening, the kitchen looked brighter than Emily remembered it ever being. There was soup simmering on the stove, real soup with meat and vegetables, and bread laid out on a clean towel. Emily watched from the table, legs swinging, unsure how to feel. Her father watched Linda too. The way he looked at her was new, alert, almost hopeful, and Emily noticed it immediately. When Linda moved in, she did not come alone. Her 2 children came with her, along with their clothes, school bags, and expectations. The apartment changed quickly. New curtains appeared at the windows. Plants filled the sills. Mornings smelled like coffee and toast instead of silence. Linda woke the children early, checked homework, reminded them to pack lunches. For the first time in years, the apartment felt busy, alive. "This is what a real family looks like," Emily's father said one evening, pulling her into a brief hug. Emily nodded, wanting to believe him. At first, she tried harder. She followed instructions quickly, cleaned when asked, stayed quiet when conversations turned away from her. But over time, patterns formed that were impossible to ignore. When birthdays came, Linda's children received new clothes, electronics, praise for their achievements. Emily was given practical things, items already on sale, handed over without ceremony. At school meetings, Linda attended only when her own children were involved. When Emily brought home good grades, the response was brief and distracted. None of it was cruel. No one raised their voice or called her names. That was what made it harder to question. There was always an explanation, always a reason why something could not be done for Emily just then. She learned that asking led nowhere. Complaining only made things uncomfortable. So she stopped doing both. Instead, she made herself useful. She cleaned floors, washed dishes, helped where she could. She spoke when spoken to and stayed out of the way the rest of the time. Her presence became quiet, functional, easy to overlook. Being helpful felt safer than being visible. School became her refuge. In classrooms and libraries, there were rules that applied to everyone equally. Teachers noticed her work. Books welcomed her without conditions. There, Emily felt steady, unjudged, and unseen in the right way. At home, she adjusted her expectations downward until disappointment no longer surprised her. Belonging, she learned, could exist on the surface while eroding underneath. And without ever being told, Emily understood that in this new family, her place would always be conditional. By the time Emily reached her early teens, she had perfected the art of staying unnoticed. It was not something she had been taught outright. It developed quietly, shaped by observation and necessity. She learned when to move through the apartment without drawing attention, how to complete chores before anyone asked, how to occupy as little space as possible. Being invisible meant fewer questions, fewer expectations, fewer disappointments. She studied alone, usually late at night, long after the television had gone quiet in the living room. Her desk was small and uneven, pushed against the wall of the bedroom she shared. Emily waited until the lights were off before turning on her desk lamp, sometimes covering it with a thin scarf to soften the glow. She worked carefully, determined not to be a problem anyone had to solve. At school, she was different. Teachers noticed her focus, the way she listened, the precision of her answers. They praised her essays, trusted her with responsibilities, asked her to help pass out papers or explain a problem to the class. Emily never bragged about this at home. She learned early that success, when it belonged to her, did not carry much weight there. The school library became her second home. It was warm, quiet, predictable. The librarian, Mrs. Collins, learned Emily's routine without ever asking questions. One afternoon, as Emily lingered longer than usual, Mrs. Collins placed a small paper bag on the corner of the desk and walked away. Inside was a sandwich and an apple. Nothing was said. Emily understood immediately and never forgot the gesture. It was the first kindness that came without explanation or obligation. Money remained a constant worry, even if it was never discussed openly. Emily began saving small amounts whenever she could, change found in coat pockets, a few dollars earned from helping classmates with homework. She started tutoring younger students after school, charging modestly, careful not to seem greedy. Every payment went into a notebook where she tracked income and expenses with quiet precision. She liked seeing numbers add up, liked knowing exactly where she stood. There was comfort in control, in planning. As the months passed, something shifted inside her. Emily stopped waiting for things to improve on their own. She stopped hoping that one day someone would notice she needed more. Instead, she began to think in steps, years, goals. She read about college programs, financial aid, part-time jobs. She paid attention to deadlines and requirements, storing information away like tools she would need later. Endurance had carried her this far, but Emily understood now that it would not take her out. Escape, if it was going to happen, would have to be deliberate, quietly prepared, earned inch by inch. For the first time, she was no longer just surviving her life. She was planning her way out of it. Emily's exam results were strong enough to secure her admission to a local college in Dayton. When the acceptance email arrived, she read it twice, then a third time, as if expecting it to disappear. There was no celebration at home, no questions about her plans. When she mentioned it at the dinner table, Linda nodded briefly and returned to her phone. Her father murmured something about being careful and not getting into trouble. That was all. Emily did not expect more. By then, she understood what indifference looked like. She began packing quietly. Her belongings fit into a single worn suitcase, a few changes of clothes, textbooks she had collected over the years, and one small keepsake from her mother, a plush toy that had survived every move, every cleaning purge. She hesitated before placing it on top, then closed the suitcase gently, as if sealing something private inside. She left early in the morning, before anyone else woke up. The apartment was still, the air heavy with sleep. Emily wrote a short note and placed it on the kitchen table, nothing dramatic, just a promise to call. She paused by the door for a moment, listening, then picked up her suitcase and stepped into the hallway. The door closed softly behind her. No one noticed. Outside, the sky was pale and unfinished. Emily pulled her suitcase across the quiet courtyard, the wheels rattling over cracked concrete. With each step, something loosened in her chest, not relief exactly, but space. The feeling that her life was finally beginning to move forward. Student housing was far from perfect. The furniture was mismatched, the walls thin, the floors scuffed by years of other lives passing through. But the room was hers. There were no rules about when the light had to be turned off, no one monitoring her movements. For the first time, Emily could exist without adjusting herself to someone else's expectations. Her roommate, a journalism major named Katie, greeted her with easy laughter and unfiltered curiosity. She asked questions Emily wasn't used to answering. What she liked, what she wanted to do, who she hoped to become. At first, Emily stumbled over her responses. Then, slowly, she found her voice. Confidence did not arrive all at once, but it began to grow. To cover expenses, Emily took a job at a small coffee shop near campus. The pay was modest, the hours long, but the work was honest. She learned how to move quickly, how to smile at customers, how to manage her time. The routine grounded her. Life was still hard, still uncertain, but it was hers. Emily no longer felt like she was simply enduring each day. She was choosing it, and in that choice something new took shape, an early sense of selfhood, fragile but real, finally allowed to exist. Ryan Carter entered Emily's life during her second year of college, appearing almost effortlessly, as if he had always belonged there. He was confident in a way she was not used to, comfortable speaking about plans and possibilities as though they were already within reach. He dressed well, carried himself easily, and seemed generous with his time and attention. To Emily, he felt like something solid arriving after years of uncertainty. He talked about ambition, about the future he was building, a steady career, a comfortable home, stability. The words themselves mattered less than the way he said them. With certainty, with the promise that nothing would ever fall apart the way it had before. Emily listened closely, absorbing every detail. For the first time, someone spoke to her as if she were part of a future rather than an afterthought. She fell in love quickly. Too quickly, some of her friends warned. Katie raised an eyebrow more than once, pointing out how fast things were moving, how easily Ryan dismissed practical concerns. But Emily did not want to hear it. After a childhood spent being overlooked, Ryan's attention felt like rescue. His intensity felt like commitment. She mistook the speed of his affection for safety. Their relationship moved forward without pause. Dinners turned into nights together. Nights turned into plans. When Ryan suggested getting married, it sounded less like a question and more like a natural next step. The wedding itself was small and quiet, held without much ceremony. Emily's father could not attend due to work. Linda sent a brief, congratulatory message. There were no speeches, no celebration that lingered into the night. Emily told herself that none of that mattered. Reality arrived quickly after the paperwork was signed. Rent had to be paid every month. Bills accumulated. Groceries, transportation, unexpected expenses. Everything cost more than Emily had imagined. Ryan spoke often about his potential, about opportunities that were just around the corner, about how things would improve once he was noticed. He avoided conversations about budgets and deadlines, brushing them aside with confidence that never quite translated into action. Emily continued working at the coffee shop while juggling her classes. She covered more than her share without complaint, convincing herself that this imbalance was temporary. She wanted to be supportive. She wanted to believe in him. When she discovered she was pregnant, fear eclipsed everything else. She sat alone with the test in her hands, her mind racing through numbers, schedules, and responsibilities that suddenly felt impossibly heavy. They were not ready. They barely had enough to get by. The future she had clung to wavered. Ryan reacted differently. He smiled, pulled her close, and spoke with the same calm certainty he always used. Everything would work out, he said. His parents would help. Opportunities would open up. This was just the beginning of something good. Emily wanted to believe him, and so she did. Pregnancy changed everything Emily had been balancing so carefully. As her body grew heavier and her energy faded, long shifts at the coffee shop became harder to manage. She switched to remote study, telling herself it was temporary, just until things settled. Income became inconsistent. Some weeks she worked late into the night, taking on small online tasks wherever she could find them. Her laptop balanced on her knees as she tried to ignore the ache in her back. Ryan, meanwhile, grew increasingly absent. He talked constantly about opportunities, about meetings that might lead somewhere, about people who promised connections. None of it was concrete. He left early and returned late, sometimes not at all, brushing off Emily's questions with reassurances that everything he was doing was for their future. Emily listened, nodded, and tried not to measure how often his words failed to match his actions. When labor began, it was in the middle of the night. Emily called Ryan from the bathroom floor, her hands shaking as she spoke. He answered groggily, promised to come, then hung up. She waited, breathing through the pain, checking the time again and again. When the contractions became too close to ignore, she called for an ambulance. The ride to the hospital passed in a blur of fluorescent lights and clipped voices. Ryan did not arrive. Lily was born just before dawn in a Dayton hospital room that felt both too bright and impossibly quiet. Emily held her daughter against her chest, overwhelmed by the weight and warmth of this small new life. Lily's cries filled the space where fear had been. In that moment, exhaustion and terror collapsed into something fierce and undeniable. Emily understood, with absolute clarity, that nothing else mattered the way this did. Ryan arrived late that evening with flowers and apologies. His phone, he said, had died. There had been complications at a meeting. He smiled nervously, kissed Emily's forehead, promised again that things would get better now. Emily was too tired to argue. She focused on Lily instead, memorizing her tiny fingers, the way her breathing softened when she slept. The weeks that followed blurred together. Days were measured in feedings and short, broken stretches of sleep. Nights stretched endlessly. Emily learned to function on instinct, moving carefully so she would not wake Lily once she finally drifted off. Ryan was rarely home. When he seemed distracted, restless, already halfway elsewhere. Money became a constant, silent pressure. Help came sporadically from Ryan's parents. Transfers that appeared without explanation and disappeared just as quickly into rent, diapers, and medical bills. Emily accepted it reluctantly, her gratitude tangled with shame. She had never wanted to depend on anyone again. Ryan began disappearing for days at a time. His messages grew shorter, his excuses less convincing. Emily stopped asking where he had been. She did not have the energy. She held Lily, rocked her through the night, and tried to silence the growing fear that she was doing this alone. The weight of it all pressed down, relentlessly. Emily felt herself thinning under the strain. Stretched between responsibility and abandonment, she told herself to keep going, to endure the way she always had. But beneath the routines and quiet determination, something fragile was beginning to crack. Ryan left on an ordinary afternoon, the kind that offered no warning. Emily was standing beside Lily's crib, folding a blanket that had already been folded twice when he spoke. His voice was low, uncertain, as if he hoped the words might soften themselves before reaching her. He said there was someone else. He said it had been going on for a while. He said he was sorry. Emily did not turn around at first. Lily slept peacefully, her chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that felt unreal against what was happening. For a moment, Emily focused only on that, on the simple fact that her daughter was safe, breathing unaware. When she finally faced Ryan, she did not raise her voice. She did not ask questions she already knew the answers to. She did not beg. The silence between them stretched. Ryan shifted his weight, avoiding her eyes. He spoke about responsibility, about still helping financially, about doing what was right. The words sounded rehearsed. Emily listened without reacting. Somewhere deep inside, a familiar sensation settled in. Not shock, not even anger, but recognition. She had felt this fracture before, when her mother died, when she learned not to expect too much. Ryan packed quickly. There was no dramatic exit, no slammed door. When it closed behind him, the apartment felt larger and emptier at the same time. Emily stood where she was for a long moment, then returned to Lily's crib. She rested her hand lightly on the railing and exhaled. This time she did not collapse. The phone rang later that evening. It was Margaret Carter. She said she had heard from Ryan and was on her way. Emily considered refusing, but exhaustion dulled her instincts. An hour later, Margaret arrived with grocery bags in her arms and a look that carried no judgment, only concern. She set the bags down, washed her hands, and leaned over Lily's crib without asking permission. "She's beautiful," she said quietly. They sat at the kitchen table after that, the same table where Emily had once tried to make sense of her life alone. Margaret did not excuse her son's behavior. She did not defend him or minimize the damage. She spoke plainly, acknowledging his immaturity, his failures, the patterns she recognized all too well. "I thought becoming a father would change him," she said. "I was wrong." Margaret told Emily she would not abandon them. Not Emily, not Lily. She offered help, real help, time, childcare, whatever support she could give. There were no conditions attached, no expectations of gratitude or reconciliation, just presence. Emily felt something inside her loosen. Not relief exactly, but a cautious trust she had learned to ration carefully. She accepted the help because she had no choice. Because Lily needed stability more than Emily needed pride. Life divided itself quietly into before and after. Emily began to move forward out of necessity. She took on more work when she could, slept when Lily slept, accepted Margaret's presence as an anchor rather than a reminder of what had failed. The days were still hard, but they were no longer empty. Family, Emily realized, was not defined by shared names or broken promises. It was defined by who showed up when everything fell apart. And for the first time since Ryan left, Emily was not alone in the room. With Margaret's help, Emily began to put structure back into her days. It was not dramatic and it was not fast, but it was real. Margaret watched Lily several mornings a week, rocking her through naps and feeding her with the same quiet patience she had once hoped her son would learn. In those hours, Emily returned to work part-time, first picking up extra shifts where she could, then applying for positions she had once believed were out of reach. The opportunity came through a remote junior accounting role with a small tech company. The interview was brief and practical. The manager asked about gaps in her resume, about availability, about reliability. Emily answered honestly. She did not oversell herself. She did not apologize for being a mother. A week later, she received the offer. The balance was brutal, but manageable. Emily worked during Lily's naps and late at night after she was asleep. She learned to move seamlessly between spreadsheets and bedtime routines, between deadlines and diaper changes. Some days blurred together until she could barely remember what day of the week it was. Other days, progress felt almost visible. A completed task, a paid invoice, a small sense of control returning. When Lily was old enough, Margaret helped secure a spot at a nearby daycare. The first morning Emily left her there. Lily cried and reached for her, tiny fingers clutching the fabric of Emily's jacket. Emily walked away with her chest tight, fighting the urge to turn back. She sat in her car afterward, hands on the steering wheel, breathing slowly until the shaking passed. The guilt never fully disappeared, but it softened over time. Lily adapted gradually. The tears shortened. New routines formed. She learned names, songs, the comfort of predictability. Emily watched her grow sturdier, more confident, and allowed herself to believe that this, too, was part of building something better. Money remained tight, but it no longer felt like an emergency waiting to happen. Bills were paid on time. Groceries were planned instead of improvised. There was no sudden relief, no dramatic shift in circumstances, just incremental improvement. Enough to breathe, enough to sleep through the night most days. Confidence returned quietly without announcement. Emily noticed it in small moments, in the way she spoke during meetings, in the way she no longer flinched when opening her bank app, in the way she made decisions without second-guessing herself at every step. She stopped feeling like she was guessing her way through life. She was still tired, still stretched thin, but the despair that once pressed down on her had loosened its grip. Emily was no longer surviving blindly, reacting to whatever came next. She was moving forward deliberately, guided by necessity and strengthened by consistency. Each day added another layer to the foundation she was building, not just for Lily, but for herself. Emily met Daniel Moore in the narrow hallway outside Lily's daycare classroom on a rainy morning. Lily was refusing to put on her jacket, her small hands pushing it away with determined frustration. Emily crouched beside her, speaking softly, trying not to rush. That was when Daniel knelt down beside them, holding a jacket of his own. "Want some help?" he asked, his voice calm, unhurried. He introduced himself simply. Daniel, a widower. His son, Noah, was in the next classroom. Mornings, he explained with a faint smile, were often battles. Emily understood immediately. There was no awkwardness in the exchange, no forced friendliness, just recognition. Their routines began to overlap. Drop-offs, pickups, brief conversations in the parking lot while children tugged at their hands. Daniel never lingered, never pushed. He listened more than he spoke. When he did talk, it was about practical things, work schedules, daycare policies, the quiet adjustments of raising a child alone. He did not speak in promises or grand plans. He spoke in certainties he could stand behind. Emily noticed the difference quickly. Daniel showed up when he said he would. If he was running late, he sent a message. If he made a suggestion, it came with follow-through. There were no dramatic gestures, no declarations meant to impress. Just consistency, presence, patience. The children grew comfortable first. Lily stopped hiding behind Emily's leg when Daniel approached. She reached for his hand on the playground, accepted his help without hesitation. Noah, reserved at first, began talking to Emily about his favorite books and the toy cars he lined up at home. Their bond formed without effort, shaped by proximity and shared calm. When Daniel invited them for coffee one afternoon, it felt natural rather than charged. They sat together while the children played, talking about ordinary things, work, loss, the way life had narrowed and expanded in unexpected ways. Emily felt no need to impress him. She spoke honestly without rehearsing. Love developed quietly, not through fantasy, but through reliability. Months later, Ryan reached out. He suggested meeting at a cafe near campus. When Emily saw him, she barely recognized the man she had once built her future around. He looked older, less certain, his confidence dulled around the edges. He spoke about mistakes, about wanting to do better. Lily stayed close to Emily, studying him with polite indifference. Emily felt no surge of anger, no satisfaction, only distance. She listened, nodded, and set clear boundaries. There was nothing left to argue over. Ryan left soon after, his presence fading as easily as it had returned. That evening, as Emily tucked Lily into bed, Daniel was in the kitchen washing dishes without being asked. The sound of running water, the steady rhythm of movement, filled the apartment with something familiar and grounding. Closure, Emily realized, did not always arrive through confrontation. Sometimes it came through contrast, through recognizing the difference between someone who promised and someone who stayed. Emily and Daniel built their life together, gradually, without rushing any step. There was no moment that felt like a grand decision, no dramatic turning point where everything suddenly became certain. Instead, certainty grew through repetition, through mornings that began the same way, through evenings that ended without tension. They talked about the future carefully, not in sweeping promises, but in practical questions. How much space the children would need, which neighborhoods felt safe, how far the commute would be. When they began searching for a home, they were not looking for perfection. They were looking for enough. Enough room for two children to share laughter and arguments. Enough quiet for sleep. Enough stability to stop bracing for loss. Weekends became filled with small rituals. Grocery lists written together. Pancakes made while Lily and Noah argued over who got the blue plate. Shoes left by the door, jackets forgotten in the car. Bedtime routines stretched longer than planned, with extra stories and whispered conversations after the lights were turned off. Daniel read aloud in a steady voice. Emily listened from the hallway, leaning against the wall, letting the sound settle. Happiness no longer arrived as anticipation. It lived in the ordinary. One evening, as they reviewed paperwork at the kitchen table, Daniel mentioned a potential home they would see the next day. A few bedrooms, a small yard, nothing extravagant. Emily nodded, then paused, struck by how calm she felt. There was no fear attached to the thought of staying, no instinct telling her to prepare an exit. That realization stayed with her. Later that night, after the apartment had gone quiet, Emily stood alone by the window. The city lights outside were familiar now, no longer symbols of escape or uncertainty. She thought of the path that had brought her here, of the child who learned early how to disappear, of the young woman who mistook urgency for safety, of the mother who rebuilt her life out of necessity rather than choice. There had been no revenge, no moment of triumph over anyone who had wronged her, and she understood now that she did not need one. What she had built was stronger than that. Her stability had been earned slowly, through endurance, consistency, and growth, through showing up for her child even when no one showed up for her, through learning the difference between attention and care, between promises and presence. Emily returned to the bedroom, where Daniel slept lightly, one arm stretched toward the empty space beside him. She lay down without disturbing him, listening to the steady rhythm of the home around her. In the next room, Lily and Noah slept, their doors slightly open, the quiet interrupted only by breathing and the distant hum of the city. For the first time, Emily understood what it meant to belong without conditions. This was her home, not imagined, not borrowed, not temporary. and standing within it, surrounded by the family she had chosen and built. Emily felt grounded in something stronger than hope, quiet certainty, finally her own.